Imagine this. The one person a narcissist fears most isn't someone who screams, fights, or seeks revenge. It's an empath who's had enough and walks away with unshakable clarity. Carl Jung, the genius behind analytical psychology, uncovered a truth so shocking it flips the script on toxic relationships. In this video, we're diving into the psychological battle between narcissists and empaths, revealing the 3 transformations that make an empath untouchable. Through real-life stories and Jung's timeless wisdom, you'll discover how to break free from manipulation and reclaim your power. Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship that drained you? Stick around because this journey might just change everything. Let's get started. Picture this: a relationship that feels like a dance, but one partner is leading with a hidden agenda. This is the dynamic Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, described when he explored the collision between an empath and a narcissist. It's not just a relationship, it's a psychological battlefield where one seeks to connect and the other seeks to control. But what makes this clash so profound? And why does it feel so impossible to break free? Let's dive into the first piece of this puzzle and uncover what Jung revealed about this toxic tango. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." At first glance, an empath and a narcissist seem like a perfect match. The empath, with their deep capacity to feel and understand emotions beyond words, is drawn to the narcissist's charisma and confidence. The narcissist, in turn, craves the admiration and emotional supply the empath so naturally provides. It's a symmetry that feels almost fated until you realize it's built on a lie. Let's meet Mia, a 32-year-old teacher with a heart so big she could sense a student's pain before they even spoke. Mia met Ethan, a charming entrepreneur who seemed to light up every room. In the early days, Ethan showered her with attention, praising her compassion and calling her his safe haven. Mia felt seen, valued, and needed. But as months passed, something shifted. Ethan's charm became a performance, his compliments laced with demands. If Mia didn't drop everything to meet his needs, whether it was canceling plans to cheer him up or validating his every decision, he'd turn cold, blaming her for not caring enough. Mia, desperate to restore the connection, poured more of herself into the relationship, believing she could fix him. Carl Jung would call this dynamic a psychological trap. The empath, with their heightened sensitivity, doesn't just feel emotions, they absorb them. They pick up on the narcissist's unspoken insecurities and instinctively try to heal them. But here's the catch: the narcissist doesn't want healing. Carl Jung observed that narcissists wear a persona mask, a carefully crafted facade designed to extract validation, not to foster genuine connection. For Ethan, Mia wasn't a partner. She was a mirror meant to reflect his idealized self. When she failed to play that role perfectly, he punished her with guilt or silence. This imbalance, Jung argued, is what makes the empath-narcissist dynamic so toxic. The empath gives endlessly, believing in the potential for transformation, while the narcissist takes, reshaping the empath's reality to serve their ego. Mia began questioning herself. Am I too sensitive? Am I not trying hard enough? Her self-worth became tied to Ethan's approval, a pattern Jung identified as a hallmark of narcissistic manipulation. The narcissist creates an environment where the empath's value is measured by how well they meet ever-shifting demands. But here's where Jung's insight gets fascinating. The narcissist isn't just manipulating emotions, they're shaping the empath's identity through subtle gaslighting, guilt-tripping, or charm. They make the empath feel that their worth depends on fixing the relationship, Mia found herself apologizing for Ethan's outbursts, convincing herself that if she loved him harder, he'd change. Carl Jung called this a distortion of the empath's natural gift. Their ability to empathize becomes a weapon turned against them. Let's pause for a real-world moment. Think about someone in your life, a friend, partner, or even a boss who made you feel like you were never enough. Maybe they'd praise you one day, only to criticize you the next, for no clear reason. That emotional roller coaster isn't random. It's designed to keep you hooked. Carl Jung noted that narcissists thrive on this chaos because it keeps the empath invested, always chasing the fleeting moments of validation that feel like love. So why does the empath stay? Jung's answer lies in a concept he called the shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves we hide the fears, doubts, and insecurities we don't want to face. For empaths like Mia, the shadow often includes a deep fear of abandonment or a belief that their worth comes from helping others. The narcissist exploits this, feeding on the empath's need to be needed. Mia stayed with Ethan not because she was naive, but because leaving meant confronting a painful truth. She'd been giving pieces of herself away to someone who couldn't reciprocate. Jung's genius was in recognizing that this dynamic isn't just personal, it's archetypal. The empath and narcissist represent two extremes of human nature. One seeks connection through vulnerability, the other through control. But here's the spark of hope. This clash sets the stage for transformation. The empath's journey, as Jung saw it, isn't about defeating the narcissist. It's about reclaiming themselves. And that begins with noticing the cracks in the narcissist's facade. For Mia, it started small. Ethan's lies about small things like why he missed her calls didn't add up. His warmth vanished when she needed support, like when she was stressed about work, and he dismissed her feelings as overreacting. These moments, Jung would say, are psychological evidence. They pile up until the empath can no longer ignore the truth. What they thought was love was control. This realization is the first step toward awakening, setting the stage for the transformations we'll explore next. Have you ever found yourself pouring everything into a relationship, convinced that if you just try harder, things will get better? That's the trap Carl Jung identified as the invisible chain binding empaths to narcissists. It's not just about love or loyalty, it's a psychological snare that exploits the empath's deepest beliefs. In this chapter, we'll uncover why empaths stay in toxic relationships far longer than they should, what Jung revealed about the hidden forces at play, and how one man's story shows the first crack in this trap. Let's dive in. Carl Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." For empaths, this unconscious force is a belief so powerful it feels like truth, the idea that they can heal, redeem, or transform the narcissist. This isn't naivety, it's a reflection of the empath's gift. Their ability to see potential where others see only flaws. But when that gift is turned against them, it becomes a prison. The narcissist doesn't just manipulate emotions, they weaponize the empath's hope, keeping them locked in a cycle of trying to fix what was never meant to be fixed. Meet David, a 28-year-old graphic designer with a knack for making everyone around him feel understood. David's best friend, Ryan. It was the kind of person who could charm a room, but leave you feeling small when the spotlight wasn't on him. Ryan would vent about his problems, his boss, his ex, his bad luck, and David would listen for hours, offering advice and encouragement. But whenever David needed support, like when he was struggling with a tight deadline, Ryan would brush him off, saying, "You're too sensitive. Man, just deal with it." Over time, David noticed a pattern. Ryan's crises always took priority, and David's needs were dismissed as unimportant. Yet, David kept showing up, convinced he could help Ryan become a better friend. This is the trap Carl Jung described. Empaths like David stay because they believe in redemption, not just of the narcissist, but of the relationship itself. They see the narcissist's pain, their insecurities, and think, if I can just reach that deeper part of them, things will change. Carl Jung argued that this belief stems from the empath's unconscious shadow, the hidden fears and doubts they avoid. For David, his shadow was a fear of being unlovable, a quiet voice that whispered, if I don't help Ryan, who will? If I walk away, am I abandoning someone who needs me? The narcissist exploits this shadow, feeding on the empath's need to prove their worth through caretaking. Let's break this down with a real-world lens. Think about a time you kept giving to someone, a partner, a friend, a family member, hoping they'd see your value. Maybe you apologized for their mistakes or made excuses for their behavior, thinking, they're just going through a tough time. That's not just kindness, it's a trap. Carl Jung pointed out that narcissists thrive on this dynamic because it keeps the empath invested in their chaos. By creating a cycle of highs, charm, praise and lows, criticism, neglect, the narcissist ensures the empath stays hooked, always chasing the good moments that feel like connection. Carl Jung's critical insight was that the empath's belief in redemption isn't about the narcissist, it's about themselves. David didn't stay with Ryan because he was blind to Ryan's selfishness. He stayed because leaving meant confronting a painful truth. He'd been tying his self-worth to fixing someone who didn't want to change. This is where Jung's concept of the shadow becomes a game changer. The shadow isn't just negative traits, it's the parts of ourselves we avoid, like the fear of being unworthy or the belief that our value comes from saving others. For empaths, this shadow keeps them tethered to the narcissist, even when their gut screams to walk away. David's turning point came during a late-night conversation. Ryan, as usual, was venting about a work conflict. But when David tried to share his own stress about a project, Ryan cut him off. You always make it about you. David felt a pang of guilt. But then something clicked. Why am I apologizing for needing support? That question was the first crack in the trap. Carl Jung would call this the moment the unconscious starts becoming conscious, a spark of awareness that challenges the empath's ingrained patterns. David began to notice how often he justified Ryan's behavior, how he'd rearrange his life to accommodate Ryan's demands, and how little he got in return. This realization is painful but powerful. Carl Jung taught that confronting the shadow isn't about blaming yourself, it's about seeing the truth. For empaths, that truth is often this: my worth doesn't depend on fixing someone else. David started asking himself questions he'd avoided. Why do I feel guilty for wanting a friend who respects me? Why am I carrying Ryan's baggage? These questions, Carl Jung argued, are the first step toward breaking the psychological trap. They shift the focus from the narcissist's needs to the empath's reality. Here's where it gets hopeful. This moment of awareness is the seed of transformation. Carl Jung believed that by making the unconscious conscious, empaths can start to untangle their identity from the narcissist's control. For David, it meant recognizing that his desire to help Ryan wasn't just about friendship, it was about proving he was enough. Letting go of that need didn't happen overnight, but it planted a question that changed everything. What if I stopped trying to save Ryan and started saving myself? This shift sets the stage for the first transformation we'll explore in the next chapter: emotional detachment. It's not about shutting down or becoming cold. It's about reclaiming your energy and refusing to play the narcissist's game. Stay with us as we dive into how David and others like him took that first step toward freedom. What if the first step to breaking free from a narcissist isn't walking away physically, but pulling back emotionally? Carl Jung the mastermind of analytical psychology, saw this as the turning point for empaths trapped in toxic relationships. It's called emotional detachment, not shutting down your heart, but redirecting your energy away from the narcissist's chaos. In this chapter, we'll explore how this first transformation begins, why it's so powerful, and how one woman's story shows the courage it takes to stop playing the narcissist's game. Let's dive into the moment everything starts to change. Carl Jung taught that true liberation starts when you confront what's holding you back. For empaths, that's often an unconscious need to fix or save the narcissist. Rooted in their shadow, the hidden fears of being unworthy or unlovable, emotional detachment is the act of stepping back from this role, refusing to let your self-worth depend on the narcissist's approval. It's not about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about choosing yourself over the endless cycle of giving without receiving. Carl Jung saw this as the first stage of shadow work, where you face the parts of yourself you've avoided and start reclaiming your power. Let's meet Sarah, a 35-year-old nurse who spent years in a relationship with her partner, Alex, a textbook narcissist. Alex was charming at first, always praising Sarah's kindness and dedication. But over time, his demands grew. He'd guilt-trip her into canceling shifts to spend time with him, then criticize her for not being there when he needed validation. Sarah felt drained, constantly apologizing for things that weren't her fault, like Alex's bad moods or his tendency to twist her words. She thought, if I just love him more, he'll see how much I care. Sound familiar? That's the empath's trap we talked about in Chapter 2. And Sarah was deep in it. The shift began with a small but seismic moment. One evening, Alex sent Sarah a barrage of texts, blaming her for not supporting him after a rough day. Usually, Sarah would respond immediately, apologizing and trying to soothe him. But this time, something felt different. Exhausted, she stared at her phone and thought, why am I always the one fixing this? Instead of replying, she put her phone down and went for a walk. That silence wasn't just a pause, it was a rebellion. Carl Jung would call this the spark of emotional detachment. The moment an empath stops feeding the narcissist's need for control, this act of stepping back is harder than it sounds. For empaths like Sarah, saying no or withholding a response feels like betraying their core identity, the part of them that thrives on helping others. Carl Jung understood this struggle. He wrote, "What you resist persists." The more Sarah resisted her urge to apologize or fix Alex's emotions, the clearer it became that her role in the relationship was to prop up his ego, not to build a partnership. Emotional detachment meant recognizing that Alex's chaos wasn't her responsibility to manage. Let's bring this home with a real-world example. Have you ever felt like you're carrying someone else's emotional weight? Maybe it's a friend who always needs advice but never listens, or a partner who blames you for their bad days. That weight isn't yours to carry. But letting it go feels terrifying because it means facing your shadow, the fear that if you stop giving, you'll lose your value. Carl Jung's insight was that emotional detachment isn't about cutting off your empathy. It's about redirecting it toward yourself. For Sarah, that meant asking, why am I sacrificing my peace for someone who doesn't value it? Sarah's journey wasn't easy. The first time she didn't respond to Alex's texts, he escalated, sending more messages laced with guilt. You don't care about me anymore. But Sarah held firm, not out of spite, but out of clarity. She started journaling about her feelings, a practice Carl Jung would applaud as part of shadow work. In her journal, she wrote, "I'm not responsible for Alex's happiness. I deserve to feel safe and respected." These words were her first step toward untangling her identity from Alex's demands. Carl Jung believed this phase of detachment is transformative because it breaks the conditioned patterns of self-sacrifice. Narcissists rely on the empath's emotional investment to maintain control. When Sarah stopped reacting to Alex's manipulations, she wasn't just protecting her energy, she was rewriting the rules of the relationship. Alex sensed this shift and tried harder to pull her back, cycling through charm, guilt, and anger. But each time Sarah chose not to engage, she felt a little stronger, a little more herself. This strength isn't about shutting down emotions, it's about redirecting them. Sarah started small. She set boundaries, like not answering Alex's late-night rants or taking time for herself without feeling guilty. These acts were her way of saying, "My energy is mine, to give, not yours to take." Carl Jung saw this as the foundation of individuation, the process of becoming whole by honoring your own needs. For empaths, emotional detachment is the first step toward building boundaries that protect, not isolate. Sarah's story shows us that emotional detachment doesn't happen overnight. It's a series of choices, small, brave moments where you choose yourself over the narcissist's drama. Each choice builds a new kind of strength, one that prepares you for the next transformation, the power of non-reaction. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this silent rebellion becomes a game changer, leaving the narcissist scrambling. Stay with us to see how Sarah, and others like her, took this step to freedom. What if the most powerful way to disarm a narcissist isn't fighting back, but refusing to play their game altogether? Carl Jung saw this as the second transformation in an empath's journey to freedom, the power of non-reaction. It's not about passive withdrawal or giving up. It's an active, deliberate choice to stop fueling the narcissist's chaos. In this chapter, we'll uncover why silence becomes a psychological weapon, how it disrupts the narcissist's control, and how one man's story shows the strength it takes to hold your ground. Let's explore this game-changing shift. Carl Jung observed that narcissists thrive on emotional reactions. They need someone to provoke, manipulate, or control to feel secure in their fragile sense of self. Every argument, every tear, every attempt to explain yourself is fuel for their ego. But when an empath chooses silence, not out of weakness, but out of clarity, it creates a psychological earthquake. Carl Jung described this as an active rebellion, a moment where the empath says, "Without words, you no longer have access to my energy." This silence isn't just quiet, it's a statement that shifts the power dynamic entirely. Let's meet James, a 40-year-old marketing manager who worked under a narcissistic boss. Lisa was a master at keeping her team on edge, praising James one day for a brilliant campaign, then berating him the next for a minor oversight. She'd call late-night meetings to fix problems she created, expecting James to drop everything and validate her decisions. If he pushed back, she'd turn it around, saying, "You're not a team player, James." For years, James played along, explaining himself, apologizing, and trying to meet her impossible standards. He thought, "If I can just prove my worth, she'll respect me." But the more he gave, the more Lisa demanded. The turning point came during a particularly chaotic week. Lisa sent James a flurry of emails, blaming him for a project delay that was her fault. Normally, James would respond with a detailed defense, trying to clear his name. But this time, exhausted and fed up, he did something different. He didn't reply. He didn't argue or explain. He simply focused on his work and let Lisa's emails sit unanswered. That silence was deafening. Lisa, sensing the shift, escalated, sending more emails, dropping by his desk, even trying to charm him with fake concern. But James held firm, responding only to work-related requests with calm, Professional brevity. Carl Jung would call this the power of non-reaction. By refusing to engage in Lisa's drama, James wasn't just protecting his peace, he was dismantling her control. Narcissists, Carl Jung noted, rely on emotional counterpoints to function. They need someone to react, to feed their need for attention or validation. When James stopped providing that fuel, Lisa's carefully constructed world began to crack. Her escalation, guilt, charm, then anger were desperate attempts to pull James back into her orbit. But his silence said something profound. I'm done playing your game. Let's make this real for you. Think about someone in your life who thrives on pushing your buttons, a partner, a friend, or even a family member. Maybe they bait you into arguments or guilt trip you into doing things you don't want to do. Every time you react, you're giving them what they want: control. Carl Jung's insight was that silence, when chosen with intention, isn't weakness, it's strength. It's the moment you stop letting their chaos dictate your reality. For James, non-reaction meant no longer justifying himself to Lisa or chasing her approval. It meant choosing his own peace over her demands. This shift isn't easy. For empaths like James, staying silent feels unnatural, even wrong. Their instinct is to explain, to fix, to make things right. But Carl Jung taught that this urge is tied to the shadow, the fear of conflict, or the belief that you're only valuable when you're useful to others. Non-reaction requires facing that shadow, asking tough questions. Why do I feel the need to respond to every jab? Why am I letting their words define me? For James, those questions were a wake-up call. He realized he'd been reacting to Lisa's manipulations not because he wanted to, but because he'd been conditioned to believe his worth depended on her approval. James's silence wasn't just about ignoring Lisa, it was about reclaiming his energy. He started setting boundaries. No answering emails after work hours. No engaging in her blame games. Each time he chose non-reaction, he felt a little more grounded, a little more in control of his own story. Carl Jung saw this as a critical step toward individuation, the process of becoming whole by prioritizing your own truth. When empaths stop reacting, they stop feeding the narcissist's ego. And that's when the narcissist starts to panic. What happens when a narcissist senses this loss of control? Carl Jung noted that they often escalate, cycling through their usual tactics: guilt, charm, or even playing the victim. Lisa tried all of these, but James's clarity kept him steady. He didn't need her validation anymore, and that realization was freeing. Carl Jung believed this phase is where empaths discover a profound truth closure. It doesn't come from the narcissist's apology or change. It comes from no longer needing anything from them. James's story shows that the power of silence is about more than staying quiet. It's about standing firm in your truth. It's a rebellion that says, my energy, my peace, my worth, they're mine, not yours. This strength paves the way for the final transformation, where empaths find their authentic voice. In the next chapter, we'll explore how this voice becomes the ultimate weapon against narcissistic manipulation. Stay with us to see how James and others like him stepped into their power. What happens when an empath stops seeking approval and starts speaking their truth? Carl Jung called this the final transformation in an empath's journey to freedom, finding their authentic voice. It's not about shouting or fighting back. It's about naming the narcissist's manipulation for what it is and reclaiming the narrative of your life. In this chapter, we'll explore why this voice is the ultimate weapon against narcissistic control, how it leads to thriving, and how one woman's story shows the power of speaking from clarity, not fear. Let's dive into the moment an empath becomes unstoppable. Carl Jung believed that to name something is to define it. For empaths, This means calling out the narcissist's tactics: manipulation, gaslighting, control, without needing their permission or validation. This authentic voice isn't reactive or defensive. It's grounded in self-awareness and truth. It's the moment an empath steps out of the narcissist script and becomes the author of their own story. This shift, Carl Jung argued, is the pinnacle of individuation, the process of becoming whole by embracing your true self. For the narcissist, it's terrifying because it means they're no longer the main character in your life. Let's meet Emma, a 29-year-old writer who spent years in a toxic friendship with Chloe. A narcissist who thrived on control, Chloe was the life of every party. But behind closed doors, she demanded Emma's constant attention. She'd criticize Emma's choices, her career, her style. Even her dreams then play the victim. When Emma tried to set boundaries, Emma would over-explain herself, hoping Chloe would understand her perspective. "I thought if I could just make her see my side, we'd be okay," Emma said. But every explanation only gave Chloe more ammunition to twist Emma's words and keep her doubting herself. The breakthrough came when Emma started journaling, a practice Carl Jung would call a cornerstone of shadow work. In her journal, she wrote about the patterns she'd ignored: Chloe's subtle put-downs, her guilt trips, her way of making Emma feel small. One day, after Chloe dismissed Emma's excitement about a new writing project as cute but unrealistic, Emma reached her limit. Instead of explaining or apologizing, she looked Chloe in the eye and said, "That's not feedback. That's control. I'm done letting you define what I'm capable of." Those words weren't loud or angry. They were calm, clear, and unshakable. That was Emma's authentic voice. Carl Jung saw this moment as mythic. Naming the truth, calling manipulation what it is, reclaims your power. For Emma, it meant no longer begging for Chloe's approval or trying to fix the friendship. It meant defining the relationship on her own terms. This voice, Carl Jung noted, isn't about confrontation for its own sake. It's about clarity. When Emma said, "This was not friendship, this was control," she wasn't just speaking to Chloe, she was rewriting her own story. The narcissist's power crumbles when their carefully crafted narrative no longer holds. Let's ground this in your world. Have you ever wanted to call out someone's toxic behavior, but held back, afraid of their reaction? Maybe you rehearsed what you'd say, only to stay silent because you feared conflict or rejection. Carl Jung's insight is that your authentic voice isn't about winning an argument, it's about honoring your truth. For empaths, this means letting go of the need to be liked or understood by the narcissist. It's saying, "I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing along anymore." Emma's moment of truth wasn't just about standing up to Chloe, it was about standing up for herself. This transformation is where thriving begins. Carl Jung observed that when empaths find their authentic voice, they don't just survive narcissistic abuse, they grow because of it. Emma didn't just walk away from Chloe, she started pouring her energy into her writing, her passions, and relationships that lifted her up. She set boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as frameworks to invite authentic connection. Carl Jung called this individuation, becoming fully yourself, not defined by what you give to others, but by who you are. For the narcissist, this is the ultimate fear. Carl Jung noted that narcissists crave significance above all else, to be the center of someone else's story. When Emma thrived, Chloe's worst nightmare came true. She became irrelevant. Emma's success, her confidence, her joy, they weren't dependent on Chloe's validation. This, Carl Jung argued, is psychological annihilation for the narcissist. They can't manipulate someone who no longer needs them, who lives from a place of wholeness rather than woundedness. Emma's journey shows that finding your authentic voice is a process. It started with journaling to name the truth, then grew into small acts of courage, like refusing to engage in Chloe's drama or saying no without guilt. Each step built a stronger sense of self. Carl Jung believed this voice is transformative because it's rooted in self-respect, not reaction. When Emma stopped seeking Chloe's approval, she discovered something profound. Her worth wasn't tied to fixing others. It was hers. Always. This final transformation makes empaths untouchable. Carl Jung's concept of individuation means building boundaries that aren't just protective but life-giving. Emma's boundaries, choosing who deserved her time and energy, allowed her to create a life that felt like a sanctuary, not a battlefield. As Carl Jung put it, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For empaths, this acceptance means knowing their empathy is a gift, but it's not for everyone. It's for those who honor it, including themselves. You don't have to defeat a narcissist to win. You just have to become the version of yourself they can't control. Carl Jung showed us that the journey of an empath isn't about fighting back with anger or revenge, but about transforming from within through emotional detachment, the power of silence, and finding your authentic voice. You can break free from the narcissist's grip and build a life that's yours, vibrant, whole, and unshakable. As Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, but that acceptance is your superpower. It's the key to turning your life from a battleground into a sanctuary. So, what's your next step? If you've ever felt trapped in a toxic relationship, take a moment to reflect. Which of these transformations, detachment, silence, or finding your voice, resonates with you right now? Share your story in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone else to start their own journey. And if this video hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss our deep dives into Carl Jung's wisdom and the path to self-discovery. Together, let's build boundaries that don't just protect us, they set us free. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Your light is yours to reclaim. Go shine it.